Thanks everyone for being here. It's very helpful. It gets us a little bit more energized to see your faces and know someone's listening. The typical thing we do is we'll start off with Jake giving us a brief description of his journey from, let's call it graduating from high school to today. And that'll just help us get the context of the conversation that we're going to have. Because there are lots of things that he will be able to show us and teach us that are interesting tidbits about his career that we can take to ourselves in our own journeys. But even more interesting is he's got a lot of expertise on matters that we all probably care about in today's societies and dealing with information and so forth. So with that, Jake, would you like to give us a little brief bio? Anything that you want to put out, but just I want to hint at like make sure you hit the schools and a little
Mhm.
bit of the internships and like the foreign country you end up in because I want to talk about that too.
Sure, absolutely. Well, great to see everyone. Thanks for taking time on a summer afternoon. I'm Jake Batsell, Flinn class of 1992, which is the year I graduated from Prescott High School, 1 year ahead of a certain Matt Ellsworth, who's also joining us today. Uh, but uh, as far as my journey, I mean, I was a strange, one of those strange people who always knew what I wanted to do. I knew I wanted to be a journalist, and it didn't make any sense because both my parents were public school teachers and educators, and just somehow just the habit and ritual of reading the newspaper every morning, especially the sports box scores, and being an athlete myself, I just, did my own newspaper in fourth grade, and then went on to become the editor of my high school paper and worked with Matt at Prescott High School. But a very formative step involving the Flinn, what really kind of opened my eyes to the whole Flinn experience, was the editor-in-chief my sophomore year was Chris Mays, the now Attorney General. For anyone who doesn't realize that, I imagine you had a chance to interact with Chris over the years as well. But and Chris really was just a role model in so many ways in terms of journalistic passion, journalistic integrity, but also in how she really harnessed the special aspects of the Flinn Scholarship to really maximize her college career. And so, in her case, I saw that, she was not only the editor of the state press at ASU, but also had one of her Flinn study abroad experiences was in South Africa as apartheid was starting to fall. And, she had deep mentor relationships. And so she really embodied how you could really make the most out of a Flinn scholarship. And when I was lucky enough to receive it, I knew that I just wanted to try to use it as a rocket booster to accelerate my career as a journalist. And so the ways that that happened was, going to the Cronkite School. I knew that there was a Flinn mentor pairing, and I approached the director of the Cronkite School then. Doug Anderson. It was still in Tempe. It wasn't downtown yet, but just immediately that began a mentorship relationship that was so crucial in guiding my path as a aspiring journalist, and led to some directed study and special reporting project classes that involved traveling. Charles Barkley was playing for the Phoenix Suns at the time, and so I did a personality profile of him and flew to Leeds, Alabama, his hometown, to interview his mom and grandma about what it was like raising little Charles Barkley. And while I was there, and that was through ASU through a special projects class, and really, it was the mentorship relationship through Dr. Anderson and then others that he introduced me to as well that kind of helped guide me along that path. Um, Also, I think definitely the study abroad opportunities. So I ended up interning in Washington, D.C. for the Arizona Republic's Washington, D.C. Bureau summer of my sophomore year. And that led to just basically covering Congress for the Arizona Republic, working as an extern. I was taking classes at Georgetown University through the Institute on Political Journalism through the Fund for American Studies, but I technically was an extern and not an official intern, but that was made possible by the fact that Flinn, helped support summer activities and may not have been possible otherwise. And then the big trip between junior and senior year was traveling to Zimbabwe and doing my honors thesis research on press freedom in Zimbabwe. That's what I used the majority of my Flinn funding for, and happened to be in the country at a time when there was a trial going on for three journalists who had reported that the President Mugabe had married his secretary in a secret ceremony, which actually turned out to be true, but they were still hauled into jail for libel and sedition. And I sat in on a court case where they were convicted of printing falsehoods, and it really helped underscore, the press freedoms that we take for granted in the U.S. and that maybe aren't even as strong today as they were in the mid 90s. But Was the editor of the state press, and then started doing internships after I graduated, and did a 3-year residency program as a reporter at the Seattle Times, and kind of stumbled my way into business journalism, which would come in handy later. But also that honors thesis experience really underscored that I wanted to return to school and get a master's degree in something other than journalism. I thought I was going to be a globetrotting foreign correspondent, and ended up going to UT Austin for a master's degree in comparative politics, which involved returning to Zimbabwe for my master's thesis. But took that opportunity to go to not just Zimbabwe, but South Africa and other places and talk to foreign correspondents, U.S. foreign correspondents. We're already starting to U.S. newspapers were starting to dial back in their foreign bureaus, but I got some kind of sobering insights into what it meant to be a foreign correspondent, and also happened to meet my now wife and fellow journalism professor, and the whole experience was amazing, but made me realize that foreign correspondence wasn't for me. And so then went back to the Seattle Times as a business reporter covering the retail beat, covering fun companies like Nordstrom and Starbucks and Costco. Got to travel to Central America to write a 3-part series about how coffee gets from the fields of Costa Rica and Nicaragua into your latte at Starbucks. And then my wife got an opportunity to teach full time at the University of North Texas, which brought us to Dallas, where I worked for the Seattle Times, or excuse me, for the Dallas Morning News for a few years as a reporter. And then the opportunity presented itself to teach digital journalism full time at SMU. And that is what I've been doing for the last 17 years. First, really focusing on the changing role of journalism in the digital age, especially how social media and audience engagement were changing the way journalism is practiced in the digital era. And for the last 5 or 6 years, I've been focusing on business journalism, more specifically as an endowed chair of business journalism. We have the William O'Neill program in business journalism here at SMU, one of the few undergraduate business reporting programs in the country. So that pretty much sums it up, I guess, since high school.
Perfect.
But it very much was propelled and guided through everything the Flinn had to offer.
So now we've got the context. He's been doing a lot of things. Even within journalism, there's lots of different hats you can wear, which I think it's super interesting to dive into a little bit. But, I'm just, because I love foreign countries, I want to start with Zimbabwe because it's not the typical destination. Not that any Flynn destination is typical on these journeys abroad, but like, can you tell us was there anything specific that dropped you in Zimbabwe, and then I want to discuss some of the stuff that you learned there.
Sure. Yeah. Part of me, I guess, through the example of Chris Mays and other Flinn scholars who went to non-European destinations. I wanted to go someplace that, was a little bit different and would, totally provide it completely eye-opening experience, different from any place that I'd ever been. Zimbabwe was really compelling at the time. It was uh, seen as sort of a beacon of hope in terms of as South Africa was starting to begin the early stages of its democracy. The early days of Zimbabwe's independence in the 1980s were promising, but there was political opposition that was forming at the time too, and I was really drawn to see that firsthand. Part of it too, though, was just there was NAU had a partnership with a Canadian university, Wilfrid Laurier University, and a political science professor at SMU, or excuse me, at ASU, knew of my interest in traveling to Africa, and he said, "Hey, there's this NAU program," and there was reciprocal credits and everything being from a state university. So it was a kind of combination of just the curiosity of what was going on in Southern Africa and the whole region at the time, with just kind of the perfect program to join to be able to do it.
So you mentioned it already, but like the first the first instance, you were encountered with, like you said, there was a beacon of hope, which of now we in retrospect we're like hope was squashed. Um, but in that sense of what you were witnessing in terms of press freedoms,
Mhm.
you know, we've had a couple examples now in the US and elsewhere, and it's not just regular journalists, but just freedom of speech as well. What lessons or warning signs from your experiences there could you make an analogy to here in terms of what we can do to support free speech, or, warning signs when we think, oh, if this happens, it's getting worse. How do we look at this situation?
Well, I certainly think, strong tactics to intimidate journalists for reporting the truth, unfortunately, is something we've seen more frequently over the last decade or so. Uh, and, our ratings internationally, in terms of we'd always, for years, been at the top in terms of our press freedoms. And it just seems with legislatures today, are also posing some problems. But part of it is also just tied to the completely changed business model of journalism, and the fact, I think a lot of the strength of the legacy media in the late 20th century was sort of rooted in the fact they had a monopoly of people's attention. That if you wanted to get your news out, you kind of had to go through a newspaper or a radio station or a TV station, and there were only a handful of those. And today there's infinite options. So you really have to constantly earn your audience's attention. My generation of journalists and those before me could concentrate more on the product of journalism as opposed to um, the economic sides of it, and really actively striving to get your audience's attention at all times. So, but yeah, I think what you can do is just speak out, and call out any kinds of uh, tactics to suppress the press. Certainly, subscribing to independent media who you trust and encouraging others to do the same is really important. And uh, I guess the most tangible way that my wife, who's also a journalism professor at the University of North Texas and former journalist, trying to defend American freedoms, is during the Women's March in 2017. We made a sign with four. It said, "Brave women journalists make America great," and we had Ida B. Wells, Nellie Bly, Gwen Ifill, who had just passed away, and Katie Tour, who had been given a very hard time on the campaign trail by President Trump. And that sign was the museum, which still exists in principle, but not physically on the mall anymore. They asked for it, and we donated that sign to to the museum. So it's out there somewhere for the historical record. But yeah, just speaking out and also supporting independent media financially.
So, how do you see the intersection? I mean, you've switched to a lot of digital media work now. It's at your latest job. Um, how do you see the issue of, freedom of speech intersecting with that? Because anyone can publish in a nanosecond, and they can also take their whatever they said off. And we see this, across a variety of things, both false information, good information, stuff that would be normally up for libel if it was in a regular newspaper. Like, what are some of the things that you're thinking about on that front, given that we're in the age of instant publication?
Well, yeah, in terms of freedom of expression, I mean, so much in terms of trying to train young journalists today too. I mean, it's a really interesting time to be starting a career in journalism because I think um, the notion that you're a robot and a human being, and not, the notion that you're a robot with no opinions and that you're just going to report the quote unquote both sides of every story, really seems to be falling out of favor. That because sometimes there aren't two sides to every story. Sometimes the better way to earn your audience's trust and connect with them and earn their financial support, as well, is to be yourself as a person and connect with audiences and not be a robot who always plays everything right down the middle. So, but I think two terms I hear frequently, and this is even more prevalent now in the age of AI, are trust and transparency, and so earning audiences trust in many ways through transparency. And so not just doing watchdog journalism, but including, a box that explains your methodology and your data sets and your findings, why you went about reporting what you did, and just being really transparent about how you got the facts that you're then putting out for the public to consume. And I think doing that aggressively as journalists is something that we have to do to stay relevant in an age where people are getting their news from infinite sources. And I think as news consumers, we have to challenge ourselves to, um, be more media literate and get to the heart of, where are these facts really coming from? Going through lateral reading practices of saying like, okay, what are the common sets of facts here? What's going on in Iran? Let's look at what Fox News is reporting, what NPR is reporting, what New York Times is reporting, what the BBC is reporting, and see what at least there's some common sets of facts versus spin. And I think that takes a lot more intentional effort these days. So with infinite options, the good news is, there's infinite ways to kind of cut through the spin and figure out the basic core facts. So it presents challenges, but also, digital tools empower us to be better journalists and better media consumers.
And I was thinking, like, you just said something that made me pop a question in my head, which is like, you know, definitely in the old days, we used to watch those three channels and everyone be like reporting the facts. And it was not supposed to be about a personality unless you were the anchor person, and then, everybody knew the anchor person. But now we're in the age of influencers, right? And so almost everyone wants to have their own voice, their own channel, their own newsletter, all that. You've gone through so many different steps of your career with the purpose of, constantly writing and having your specific voice. Can you talk a little bit about, especially since you teach journalist students right now, but I think any of us have to tell a story, and no matter what job we do, we have to
Mhm.
tell our story, we have to tell other people's stories in communication. What should we be thinking of in terms of cultivating our own voice? And how did you pick up that? Like, were you just born with what you have, or did you go, oh, in the business, when I did those business reporting, I learned this. When went to Zimbabwe, I learned that. Like, how should we think about that, like framework wise?
Yeah, I mean, those of us who went to the Cronkite School all know and adore Walter Cronkite as the most trusted, at one point, the most trusted voice in America. There was the big CNN airing of Good Night and Good Luck a couple weeks ago, where we heard how Edward R. Murrow filled that role too. And I mean, you're right. The ship has sailed of that one singular voice that everyone turns to and trusts. But news influencers and even individual journalists, I mean, if you follow the New York Times on Instagram and scroll through their flagship account in a given day, you'll see, dozens of stand-ups of reporters from the federal courthouse or from the White House or even abroad where they're distilling what they're about to write 2,000 words about into 30 or 45 seconds, in hopes of building that trust and building that credibility, and also that human connection that can spur longer term relationships with readers. So as a journalism professor, I've really had to start adapting that. And so one way this past semester, I started experimenting with uh, earnings with basic social videos for earnings reports. So all students have to cover a public company. And until recently, one of the main component of a certain portion of the class was to write an earnings story that where you dig through the Securities and Exchange Commission and look through the company's latest earnings report and listen to the executive's conference call and talk about what the earnings per share were and what the sales were and other factors. And so it's still important to master those. So they write an earnings brief now, but then they're now doing a social video that kind of um, where they can use their creativity and also relate the information to their peers and translate it for them. And that's synthesizing and translating has always been a huge role of being a journalist. And so, but now if we're going to stay relevant, we've got to do that in ways that the world and the audiences are saying they want to do their news. So one particularly fun uh, way that a student did that assignment was she covered Dave and Buster's, which is based in Dallas, and they had just had a really bad quarter. They lost tons of money, but it was a combination of they were remodeling a bunch of their stores and there was bad weather as well. But the student went and I think she had someone helping her, which is fine, but she knew her stuff and she said, okay, they lost a lot of money, but it's because they were building things like this, and it was the human claw, which is a new feature at all Dave and Buster's, where like you can set up on a harness and they drop you in, and then it's like those claw machines at the carnival or at the arcade, but in human form. And she grabbed it and she got an alien as part of the human claw. And so like her final sign off of her social video for her earnings report was, with the alien and saying like, well, that was a lot of fun, 5 stars on the human claw. And maybe, better things are in store for Dave and Buster's if, we see more of these down the line. So there's a way of, had to have command of the facts and capture the narrative, but then exercising creativity in a way that is relevant to their peers and their readers.
Well, clearly, like I saw, we all see the statistics on the large and growing percentage of people who get their news from TikTok. So, in that context, is that something that you are kind of formally bringing into the curriculum, like teaching journalists how to be active in all the different social platforms like that?
Yeah, that's the main way. I mean, it was interesting this past semester in introducing that because I told the students, I'm like, listen, I want to work with you to come up with a rubric for this assignment because, what do you want to be judged on? What are the 4 or 5 things that you think would make a good, smart social video? Because I showed some examples at first from things like Planet Money and Morning Brew and some others where they do kind of humorous skits. And I think there was one where the CEO of Spotify, Daniel Ek, he's bald, and so someone put like pantyhose on their head, so they could look bald, like they were playing the role of Daniel Ek or something. But I showed some of them, and they fell flat with the students because they were sort of like, "Do I have to be funny and hilarious to get an A on this assignment?" And it was like, "Whoa, whoa, whoa, no, that's not the point at all." So it's like if you have that talent, absolutely go with it. And there were a couple of students who did, and they had fun with it. But I'm like, if you just want to be straightforward and break it down, just be conversational about it, include some visuals, just make it interesting, something that you would actually want to watch, and that you wouldn't just swipe past on your own feed. And um, so yes, it's I can't claim to have figured it all out, but between that and also AI, it just clinging to um, the traditional way journalism's always been done is not doing justice to to journalism students in the 21st century. So I'm trying to kind of adapt and learn along with the students, giving them a voice.
One thing in our company's journey that I've learned is that you don't have to, not everyone's your customer, your client, or your audience. And it's so easy to be tempted because you see, oh, so and so has 1 million views, and that reporter has that many, subscribers. And in reality, the only way you're going to get there is if you do what you're good at. And
Mhm.
so if you're not good at comedy routines, don't bother. But if you're really good at it, go for it. So I think that, leaning into your strengths and then just be consistent in being you, assuming you're good at it, then, that's like better for the recipe of success than following a recipe for someone else. That's for
Yeah,
sure.
absolutely. The way I try to conversationally put it with students is, what's your superpower? Uh, you know, what can you provide your audience? What insights, what perspectives that they can't get anywhere else? And so, whatever that is, whether it's interests or delivery of material, just kind of realizing that you have to be distinctive to stand out in today's media landscape.
Okay, I have two more questions I'm going to hit you with, and then we're going to open up to other questions. So everyone on this call, ready your questions. And if you all are just like stunned, speechless at Jake's prowess, I have more. So don't feel pressured, but it'd be really cool for you to use your voice. Um, Okay, so the next one I wanted to talk about is like the definition of success, because it's one of my personal journeys is really taking a look at how I define succeeding and how that's changed remarkably for me. And I think it's very interesting to see how you look at, you know, what does success mean to you? And kind of a corollary to that is like, if you look back at your younger self and go, wow, I wish I would have thought this way or that way, or I would have done this. Do you have any of those? It doesn't mean it's regret. It's just like informed with wisdom, new choices.
Sure. I mean, I guess I would generally define success as, feeling of having a sense of purpose with your work, whatever you're doing. As a working journalist for me, it was, informing the public, and it's interesting sometimes to think back on certain stories or you know, certain projects that had an impact, that things would be different if that made a difference somehow. I'm reading a novel right now about an obituary writer. Even writing obituaries, I think were so important because you're capturing someone's life for the public record and explaining why it mattered. So I've always found purpose in journalism. I personally feel purpose right now in training a new generation of business journalists, and trying to make the field of business journalism a little more diverse than it historically has been. So at SMU, we've established a partnership, which we're still allowed to do at a private university in Texas, which is not subject to some of the anti-DEI measures that we're seeing at public universities. But we have a program aimed at diversifying the field of business journalism, where we are guaranteed an internship slot every summer at Forbes, and for a student who makes a case for what their diverse background and perspective can bring to the Forbes newsroom. And so one of the very first of those students is still working at Forbes. Another one kind of parlayed Forbes into an internship at Bloomberg News in New York this summer. And another one is going to uh, do great things this summer and come back as a senior in the spring or in the fall. But we also have an exclusive internship program with the Dallas Morning News with similar goals. And so um, just you know through classes, through other opportunities. That's the kind of sense of purpose that I'm really feeling these days. I do think, though, going back and thinking about everything, I do think self-care and boundaries are very important. I would probably tell my younger self to not be so hard on yourself, whether it comes to GPA or whether it comes to do I really need to forfeit every Friday night of my college to career to go cover some far-flung high school football game in the outer suburbs of Chandler or Avondale or wherever I went, and I think too, I got very I was nominated by ASU for a Rhodes and Marshall scholarship, and that ended up not happening. And it underscored to me that that's really not something like that is it's wonderful if it happens, but it's not something that you can really achieve. There's so many things that have to fall into place. And it wasn't until, going through that process that you sort of realize that sometimes the stars will align, sometimes they don't, but you should really, take care of yourself and allow yourself time to grow and flourish as a human being in other ways too. So again, like you said, it's not a regret, but maybe the younger version of me could have let loose a little more often.
I love that. I kind of have I bet there's a few Flinn scholars who I kind of have that attitude, and whether they're currently in school or those of us that are OG and look back and go, you could have chilled out a little
Yeah.
and still been successful. But yeah, so I agree with that one. Okay, the last thing I'm going to bring up, which admittedly we could talk about for a whole hour, so I'm not going to lead us down that path, but like AI, journalism is definitely an area where AI can come into play for good parts and bad parts. I mean, like proofreading, awesome. But in the era of misinformation and bots that can spin up news stories and stuff, what are the issues in AI right now? Because I know you go to conferences and you're in the loop on how academic thinkers think about it. What's going on right now in your mind?
It's the buzziest subject at any journalism conference that you go to for sure. Certainly on university campuses too. Have I have basically gone, I've never wanted to take the head in the sand approach as a professor, but I've become increasingly more open to integrating it into journalistic work for class with transparency, and that's the way to go, as opposed to don't use it at all, because newsrooms are using it these days. I mean, the New York Times, Zach Seward is a guy that I know. He's the head of their AI initiatives. And one thing that makes clear at every conference I've heard him speak at is that the New York Times, they're not using it to generate articles or to write articles. Like that is still a frontier, not to be breached. But using it for investigative reporting, to kind of dig through massive data sets to unearth trends, the needle in the haystack that you might not have been able to uncover. Internal workflows. So like there's actually an app out there called YesEO. I think it's free to use. It was a guy named Ryan Restivo at Newsday who did an RJI fellowship at the University of Missouri, where you can feed a story and it will suggest five or six different headlines that then you as a human being can use your judgment to come up with the best headline. And then also just reader experiences, whether it's personalizing your content experience if you're a subscriber, even something like the Wordle bot, right? I mean, that's a pretty cool way to use AI to kind of interact with a habit forming franchise that the New York Times has. So So really, I think just whether it's I mean, a couple of the Pulitzer winners this past semester and finalists, but the semester, I still think in semesters as a professor, but this past go round, whether it was the Wall Street Journal for national reporting mapped out Elon Musk's political reinvention through using AI to analyzed 41,000 of his X posts over the past 5 years. The Washington Post was a finalist for analyzing drone and satellite footage in of Israeli airstrikes in ways that the human eye couldn't. So there's ways to leverage it, but it's kind of using AI as the background element in the news gathering process. As opposed to generating the stories or broadcast pieces that give us the news.
My follow-up comment, just to waste some time with my own hot air, is on the AI front. I've have this very similar opinion, which is if you're an expert in a field, using that expertise and leveraging AI as a research assistant that you can check and that can process lots of information quickly, it works across all fields. But you have to know what you're talking about in order to ask the question and then check the answers. But then, I joke that I have my own team of PhD research assistants thanks to AI. So it can be really helpful. Cameron, I see your hand up.
Thank you so much for being here, Jake. I'm a current Flinn Scholar going into my junior year at ASU, and I actually work a lot in the youth organizing space in politics. And we're seeing this sort of coordinated effort to control the media space among the youth, the media that the youth consume, to sort of control that. And it's been an ongoing fight, and we've actually seen it play out a lot last year and continuing on to this year, this age of new media among the youth space. So how would you recommend, as young people, being aware of that, countering any misinformation or even disinformation we find on there, and being good stewards of proper media and facts?
Yeah, I mean,
That
I'm interested to hear.
misinformation for anybody. I think
Right.
making that even bigger picture, how do we know it or how do we be aware of it without becoming a cynical person?
Yeah, I'm curious, Cameron, a little know more of the content in terms of the control. Is it like, are they asking for prior review of things that are going out on social media, or in what ways do you find that folks are trying to control the information?
Yeah, in terms of like political parties investing into new media sources
Hmm.
through podcasts. We've seen,
Mhm.
like, for example, Andrew Tate is one of them, like Alex Jones, and the other side, Midas Touch, right? Like different investments into the media space that youth currently use, and a sort of ongoing
Yes.
war to control that space. And with that war comes a lot of misinformation, disinformation. So how do we counter that and be good stewards of media practices?
Yeah, I mean, that's because we're losing control. I mean, Alex Jones, and even when the courts held him accountable, he still has a lot of diehard fans who take his word over, over the New York Times or NBC News, and so I mean even like but Joe Rogan, or I mean even my journalism students, like they're probably we're predominantly female at SMU journalism, partly because we have a fashion media major as well. But like, Alex Cooper, Alex Earl, call her daddy, is like their go-to podcast, even as journalism students. So, I mean, I guess just just instilling, that like, oh, how do you know that? I mean, that's kind of the basic question. I think whether it's interacting with peers or, kind of mentoring peers, in terms of being able to spot misinformation, is one thing, but also just to verify, just to instill that instinct of, how do they, if they might be asserting something, they might be alleging something, but where is that coming from? Where are the facts coming from? I do think lateral reading is a great exercise to sort of really encourage consumers to, news consumers to try to look at three different stories, at least three different stories for the basic facts of any particular issue that they're covering. But another, I am seeing and hearing also that young journalists are facing a lot more restrictions in terms of access to politicians and or newsmakers, or trying to muscle prior approval, whether it's for in individual quotes or full text of stories. And I think it's a much more challenging landscape, but just really trying to underscore the importance of how something, how you get to the root, where's the source, the source level of where facts are coming from, and whether that's coming through an influencer, a podcast, or a reporter. Just really challenging sources and consumers to stick to that ideal.
Joanna says, hi there. I want to ask, as an incoming journalism major at ASU, what was one piece of advice you give for freshmen, both in short and long term, for the industry?
Yeah, great question. Well, Johanna, welcome to journalism. Welcome to ASU and being a Flinn Scholar. And um, you know, um, I think, and we kind of spoke about this a little bit, Sarah, as well. I think this certainly definitely applies to journalism. I think it applies also more broadly too. But from Flinn, that Flinn can open doors, but you really have to you have to knock. You have to um, be aware of the mentorship and travel options and think about how you can really customize those amazing individual opportunities that you have as a Flinn Scholar studying at ASU to really leverage that into the best experience possible. And so if you haven't already, I would identify professors that you want to work with at SMU or at ASU that you really want to learn from. Think about ways that you can harness your Flinn travel experience to get the most out of your Flinn experience as well. But I think I think just having passion for informing communities and bringing communities the information they need, but also shedding light on make bringing them the information that they need to live fuller lives. And so I feel like your generation has so many different ways to do that than prior generations did. You could do that by going to work for traditional news organizations. You could see an underserved community out there that you can fill the gap and just do it yourself through a Substack, or a podcast or something that could ultimately become self-sustaining in the long run. But I would just say if there's something that you're passionate about, that you really want to cover, just seize that opportunity and do it. I mean, sure, you can apply for the New York Times internship and fellowship programs and all that kind of super competitive things, but you can also, you have every ability to not just put content out there, but bring a community together through digital platforms today too. So I would just say, whether it's working for being an entrepreneur at a traditional news organization, being an entrepreneur and forming your own thing, or even freelancing. There's a lot of different opportunities if there's something you're passionate about and a community that you really want to serve and bring together.
Awesome. Okay, we're running low on time, so we're gonna go into speed mode. Sorry, everybody. But I know Jake can go into speed mode too. Michelle says, Jake, thanks for the insights. Is there a wealth line a paper owner crosses where they begin to try and influence what the reporters write about and publish, aka Bezos, LA Times owners? Obviously, it costs a lot to own a big newspaper. So by definition, I would say an owner is already very wealthy. But what's the correlation after that? When do they start getting involved in pushing people around in the reporting rooms?
Yeah. Hi, Michelle. Great to see your face. Thanks for the question. Yeah, about a decade ago, these billionaires were seen as the savior that was going to save, newspapers from hedge funds and other, malevolent forces. And then now you're starting to th see things like, Bezos molding the Washington Post opinion page to his liking, and Patrick Soon Chung in LA. You know, also having some questionable influence over some of his papers' coverage as well. So I don't think super wealthy owners are the answer. And I mean, as we're starting to see the tech oligarchy, getting more power in today's administration too. I think so I think we are seeing those lines being crossed. I do think the Washington Post, I mean, they're kind of losing subscribers these days, but they still have maintained editorial they've journalistic independence from the opinion page, and they're still kind of fighting the good fight. But some of the most interesting ownership models for news, I think, in the 21st century is the nonprofit model. I spent a year at the Texas Tribune in Austin, a pioneering nonprofit, nonpartisan news organization that has the biggest state house coverage in the United States. And they're funded through a combination of philanthropic donations, NPR style memberships, sponsored events, corporate sponsorships, and there's other ways to structure news organizations, whether the nonprofit model has seen great uh, growth in recent years, but I'm about to do a research sabbatical in the fall looking at how even for-profit newspapers like the Dallas Morning News and Seattle Times, both papers where I used to work, are creating things like education labs and transportation labs that are philanthropically funded to kind of help bring their readers coverage that isn't otherwise supported by the free market, because the Dallas Morning News, the only coverage that really pays for itself is Dallas Cowboys, food, restaurant openings, and commercial real estate movers and shakers type of things. But to pay for public interest journalism, you've got to find different models. So I hope the era of the billionaire owner is on its way out, and we're going to see more of this nonprofit or community funded approach, whether for profit or nonprofit, starting to take hold.
I'm super interested in Brian's question. Over the years you've been teaching, how have you seen journalism students change? Because journalism changes, probably the students are changing. What superpowers do you see among those studying and graduating now that the industry isn't doing a good job of putting to use?
Great questions, Brian, and great to see you. I haven't seen you at a conference in a while. I'm liking the beard. I'm inspired to maybe. I got a little one growing here, so
Oh,
maybe.
thanks.
But yeah, seeing journalism students change. I mean, I don't know if this is as much of a function of the institution where I work, or this is also happening at the state press and ASU. Maybe some of the current students can weigh in a lot, but I'm seeing, like I just lived at the newspaper. I lived at McClintock Hall, which is right next to the state press newsroom, and so had a lot of late nights there. Devoted everything to journalism. I've seen students more and more just I practicing some of those boundaries and self-care that I was talking about, and saying like, I want to be involved in other campus groups. I want to be involved in a sorority or a fraternity. I want to, do other things. And so um, I think I've definitely seen students that are better at drawing those boundaries for themselves than maybe me or my generation did. But that same passion for the truth and the creativity is still there. Superpowers you see among them studying and graduating now that the industry isn't doing a good job of putting to good use. I mean, I really feel like news organizations are starting to do this more often, but really going to your interns, going to your entry level hires, and asking them for their ideas, and saying, we've had with our Dallas Morning News internship, cases where they're kind of looped into stories that are not on the radar of your typical, middle-aged editor who thinks they know what news is. And so I think there's starting the hierarchical approach to news. I don't know if this has been your experience, but I've seen it start to realize that if we can't continue to maintain that if we want to still be relevant to our audiences. But I think certainly when experimenting with new platforms, just kind of asking for their ideas and how they see their peers consuming things, and how can we better serve and attract and earn their attention is something that probably news organizations could still keep doing better.
Which
Yep.
writing experiences were the most transformative for yourself or your technical skills, says Seth.
Yeah, hi Seth. Well, from the technical side of things, my last year at the Dallas Morning News, I was the hybrid reporter in the early stages of digital video. It actually was still, you recorded the video to tape and then it had to render, in real time before it became digital. But that opportunity I guess that was 2007 to 2008 to, I spent half my time writing stories and the other half doing digital videos to accompany those stories, really sort of awakened like this was like the Wild West, like a new form of storytelling. It sort of reminded me of when Walter Cronkite, who was trained in radio, talked about television and how he adopted that new medium and how exciting it was. And so embracing that year digital video as the hybrid reporter that year kind of put me more in the mindset of teaching and studying digital journalism at SMU, and then learning new ways to tell stories. But the writing experience that was most transformative, I mean, certainly the opportunity at the Seattle Times to travel to Costa Rica and Nicaragua and spend time in the fields with the families that were harvesting the beans, and then going and meeting with them in their homes, and to really kind of personalize the experience of the whole coffee economy and coffee industry, and to try to tell that story in a way that was relatable to readers, was a transformative experience. But others were more everyday stories. I mean, whether it's obituaries, like I mentioned before, or I was in Chicago last year and, remembered having to cover a story of, two young kids who were killed, when they were run over by a school bus. And I mean, I'm not, I think about that because as a journalist, you have to tell the good and the bad and the ugly, and just it was a privilege really to capture those kids and their personalities, and capture for the Chicago Tribune of why their lives mattered. So I think sometimes it was tragic, sometimes it was covering community festivals, or hearing Brian and other journalists, longtime journalists, have probably experienced the occasional out of the blue email from a story you wrote 5 years ago, where they say, that actually set me on a different path. Or there was a guy who sold in Seattle who sold water just for dogs, just for pets or something like that. And I hadn't thought of him in 20 years. And he emailed me a couple months ago and was like, the dog water business isn't happening anymore, but that set me on a path. And, was just thinking about you the other day. So just, I think journalism, writing for audiences and having that constant interaction with audiences, is just really a fulfilling line of work. And so, folks like Joanna and any other, Johanna, I'm sorry, and any other aspiring journalists who visited today. I'm always happy to talk about that and continue to, explain why journalism is such a great field to go into.
Internships, because you did a lot of them. Those of us who are older probably have kids who are interested in doing them. So the whole 40-year spectrum of Flinn Scholars, I'm sure, has some interest in internships.
Yes.
How do you approach them? Because you're also a professor and you're dealing with helping students doing it. What should the people looking for internships do? Where do they find them? How do they decide what to do? How do you get them when they're very competitive? Do you have any advice?
Yes, I mean, um, certainly at your institution, any programs, not just putting in the application, half-heartedly, but like going and talking to the coordinators. When you're applying for internships too, like having an understanding of the publication and why why it's someplace that you want to work, I'm always a little surprised sometimes when students apply for internships, and they, haven't even made a habit of reading the publication. But yeah, I think just whatever you can do to, you really have to make the case for what you bring to the table and why your skill set will help the organization. So, writing in cover letters or interviews, like why do you want to work at such and such? It's not, you shouldn't lead with, well, I've always admired the publication and it would be, my parents would be so proud of me if I got to work there or something like that. It's like, no, no, you said in the job description that you're looking for this, this, and this. And I've seen that you did some recent coverage about this, but here's how I think I could really help, bring a different perspective and even go deeper. And so it's a combination of leveraging contacts, being really curious and doing the prep work, going in, and then making your case for why you're the person, that best fits, what they're looking for.
Awesome advice. And all that holds true for a job interview of any sorts as well. So I would second that. Do your research, make it real, be authentic, and show that you really want it. Anyways, thank you so much, Jake. Thanks everyone for attending and being such active participants.
Thanks a lot for the conversation. It was a lot of fun. And yay, Arizona, yay, Flynn.
Yay.